This is a story of Sean Shameson, down at Caban, who met the Pooka one night near the townland of Kilfawn. So, once upon a time, there lived a lad, I've heard it said, hardy and strong, but too fond of his bed, into which he'd crawl at dawn, nor leave till darkness fell. The crossroad crowds, the dance hall lads, late nights knew him well. A fiddler of the feeble kind, dull and slow of skill, oblivious of his sawing bow and the clunky fingers and the shrill, grating, awful noise that marked him far and near as a murderer of music, as you will plainly hear. The hero of our story, if hero's to be the word, was a fiddler of poor degree, which you have just now heard. His name was Sean, a worthy name that of itself has brought some fame, one appended to the deeds of others. But Sean Shameson was only Sean, lazy as the day is long, never did a lick of work, and if he had his druthers, would spend his days curled up in bed, a lazy lump of a sleepy head. His poor widowed mother strove to keep him home, to weed the garden, dig some turf, but Sean would only wander and roam. And no improvement ever came upon his fiddle playing. He saw away on merrily like some poor donkey braying, dropping notes, ignoring phrases, putting stops in awkward places, playing too fast or too slow, attempting tunes he did not know. People only shook their head and wished that Sean had stayed in bed.
Go back to bed.
Sean assumed that all was well, but now the time has come to tell the story that unfolded exactly the way the man who told me told it. It was late one night, just past 2 o'clock or so, several hours yet before the cock would crow, announcing summer morn. Sean Shameson was on the road, heading home, his fiddle tucked beneath his slicker, humming tunes he meant to learn when he thought it might be quicker to take a shortcut. He'd never been this way before, but he was absolutely sure there toward the hill, a mile or so, then around the pond, he'd meet the Kilfawn road, and he'd be home by dawn, he hoped. Sean Shameson climbed up the ditch and down the other side and found himself in an open field, rocky, rough, and wide. And there, just ahead, a copse of trees, half hidden in the dark. So whistling up his courage, Sean Shameson embarked. The scudding clouds made eerie shadows running on the ground. The breeze through the ancient trees made a mournful, lonely sound. It seemed like things were watching from the shadows all around. But he puckered up his courage, whistled on his way, when, wham! Walked straight into a tree, which somehow he had failed to see, or that seemed to step in front of him. A hairy tree, a leg, a haunch, and a knee? Clutching fast his bleeding nose, Sean looked up from the ground, where 9 feet up a smiling face was calmly gazing down. A bearded chin, 2 shiny eyes, horns grew from its head. The silence broke as the figure spoke. "You're late," was all it said. "I'm what? Oh my, the Pooka." The Pooka, tall as a rowan tree, a giant goat on his hind legs, who wore the clothes of long ago, a long dark coat at his goatee knees, a bunch of lace at his goatee throat, a velvet waistcoat dark as wine, a chain of gold for his pocket watch, the breeches worsted tweed gathered at the knees, and there, below his goatee shins, a pair of great slick hooves. "Grab your fiddle, lad, and shape your wits to sense. It's getting late, and we've got far to go, so give us your hand." He bent and grasped the frightened lad around his trembling waist and raised him up above his goatee face. and placed him on his back and said, "Hold tight," and leapt as only goats can leap, as only Pooka goats can leap, high into the starry night. Sean Jameson hung on like death, his face and knuckles white, clenched his breath, held his teeth, kept his eyes scrunched tight. The wind whistled through his tousled hair as they flew into the night. "Don't be afeard," the Pooka said. "Pretend it's just a dream. And by the way, in all the haste, I never got your name." "Sean Jameson, Donica Bon," said Sean Jameson. "And don't forget the fiddler part," the Pooka said and smiled. "The fiddler? Oh, where if the truth be told, I'm not much of a fiddler." "Oh, you are a fiddler, sure enough, a true fiddler, true and bold, and young in years with time enough before you're getting old." Now, Sean, you'll have to understand, had never said those words before. I'm not much of a fiddler. But it is well known in Pooka lore that one will always speak the truth before the Pooka, and the Pooka, too, will always speak the truth to you. The Pooka can see and show even things we do not know are hidden in our souls. He comes when we have things to learn, but not to everyone. You can see him in this form that often strikes such fear that though his words be wise and full of truth, some people choose not to hear. "Turlako Farsa McGilligower, the Pooka, at your service," said the Pooka with a nod. "Sorry for the awful rush, but time is pressing hard, and we've got far to go before the hour's done." The ground below had changed as time sped by. At first, Sean Jameson could recognize mountains and valleys by the light of the summer moon that shone from the sky. But soon the dark crept in, and the cold came too, and the stars went out, and all about was black and vast and silent. Except, somewhere in his mind, just below his hearing, fiddle tunes were playing, almost like something you can't quite remember. "Sean Jameson, wake up, we're here." Sean started from his dream, the Pooka above him looking down. Sean looked around at a black, gray, eternal ground. But looking up again, he thought the stars flickering once more. Then he noticed the ground was smooth, not gray as before, but tiled in black and white, like a giant gaming board. Looking back up to the sky, the stars were 100 chandeliers hanging from on high. He saw no walls, no ceiling, no limits to the room that stretched out all beyond him. "Time to tune," said the Pooka. "Get your fiddle out." Sean bent to get his fiddle, tightened up the bow, plucked the strings, turned the pegs for notes too high or too low, wondered where this place might be and what the Pooka had in mind. But a Pooka, who could believe such a thing? I mean, he had heard the stories, who had not? But there's no such thing as a Pooka. "What? Oh, I thought I heard you say something." "You can put your fiddle on the table there. If you want to sit, there's a chair." And sure enough, in a little while, all sorts of grand and elegant style of chairs, tables, tapestries, a ceiling with a plaster frieze, walls and paintings and mirrors bright, fixtures of a fine delight, appeared in that empty place, like a ballroom in a palace, a shining space. "So now," the Pooka said, "the job you're here to do is to play upon your fiddle for that assembled crew." He pointed to a table further down the hall where 7 grand old ladies, dressed up as for a ball, were seated at their dinner, and each of these old ladies wore a gown of different hue, One was dressed in ermine white, another topaz blue. The third was dressed in claret red, another emerald green. The fifth was in a gown of black, as the blackest coal ever seen. The sixth was dressed in yellow like the early morning sun, and the seventh wore chocolate brown. But the face of every one looked exactly like the face of every other. Flat, unexpressive, not a smile or frown, blank, unblinking, looking straight ahead, as if no thinking, feeling creature lived behind the pale, unmoving faces. They sat passive at appointed places. At a table all with riches laden, crystal, silver, finest china, flowers, candles, wine decanters, as men in livery brought finest dishes to fulfill no apparent wishes. "The merry sisters of misery," said the Pooka with a frown, "need a bit of cheering up, or a bit of glooming down. These days are not as merry as they really ought to be. And frankly, they're bored, but I wouldn't call it misery. They seem to be marooned between the two extremes. So a little bit of music is what we need, it seems. So I brought you here, Sean Jameson, to move them in their souls, to make them feel their hearts again before their hearts grow cold. First, you play a galtry, a tune to welcome tears. Next, you play a gyantry to welcome light and cheer. Third, you play a soundtree to ease the troubled mind. 3 tunes, Sean Jameson, you play, one of each 3 kinds." Sean Jameson was standing with his fiddle and his bow. "The trouble is," he said abashed, "there's only one tune that I know." "Not so," the Pooka said. "You know your head is full of song, but first you have to listen for the tune to come along. So listen to your sadness, and when you draw the bow, the tune inside will play itself and become the tune you know. So play a galtry for us and bring us back our tears." Sean drew the bow across the strings and played what you shall hear. The music drifted softly as it eased throughout the hall. The servants looked around them when they heard the fiddle call. Sister dressed in topaz drew a deep and heavy sigh. The sister dressed in claret red began to wipe the tearful eye. And the sister dressed in emerald green began to sob and cry. And the gloom descended deeper as the music rolled on high. When Sean had finished playing, a silence filled the hall, except for Sister Emerald, who had not yet ceased to bawl, and mumbled through her teary sobs,
"I never in me life heard such a lovely tune as that. I never heard the like."
And Sean, too, was astonished and puzzled even more. How could he recognize a tune he'd never heard before? How is it that he played it with such a sure grace, made it sweet and elegant, in note and tone and phrase, and more than all the strangest things that happened yet that night, the meeting in the ancient wood, the Pooka's midnight flight. Stranger than the strangeness of his fleecy, hairy host, it was the strangeness of his playing that perplexed him the most. He turned to ask the Pooka. The Pooka clapped his hands. "And now, let's have a gantry, and maybe a wee dance." First squeal of the fiddle, the sisters took the floor, their eyes bright with laughter where tears had been before. They kicked and spun and cantered like a flock of month-old goats, heeled and toed around the room to the swirling, swelling notes. They laughed and ducked and backstepped, clapped their hands in time, lilted with the chorus, back and forth in rhyme. They spun in giddy circles and laughed and whooped and cheered. The sister dressed in emerald green swung from the chandelier. Sean played with grace and fire to the laughing, dancing house. His fingers, fast and elegant, nimble as a mouse. And as the last note sounded and to the rafters rang, the sister dressed in emerald threw back her head and sang.
"Ah, the Visla purple liga, faldi, fall down for the didy, love very little prince like larum, faldi, fall down for the didy, dum, valen father, dum, faldi, fall down for the didy, dum, faldi, fall down, calarum, fall down, faldi, for the didy, dum.
Sean finished off the rose tree with a flourish of the bow. The sisters gasped to catch their breath. He started to play low, a sound tree, a tune to welcome rest, to bring the mind back to itself like a bird home to its nest. As he watched the sisters settle back into repose, he noticed how their faces were all different. I suppose he thought that being sisters, they'd all look much alike. Boredom looks like boredom, maybe in that light. But no matter how he tried, he had to confess no one of those sisters looked anything at all like the rest. Earlier that evening, they'd only had one face. Now 7 different people were sitting in their place. When the last reposeful note had gently died away, Sean felt a sadness hold him. But the sadness held no sway, for a little laugh came bubbling up when he thought that he, Sean Samerson Donegal, had played so beautifully, and wondered yet again how such a thing could be. "Well done, Sean Samerson," Pooka said. "A fiddler true and bold. You've done good work this very night. Your fee shall be in gold. Each sister sends a golden coin. Yon emerald last sends 2. And for helping me complete this task, I have a gift for you. The gift I have is modest. 'Tis a gift you yourself have wrought. You must work it once again, or it will come to naught. The ease with which you played tonight is proper to this place, but it's a skill that sleeps within you. You may waken it apace, if you remember what you've learned this night. So, fiddler, do your task, and learn your trade aright. Those tunes you played this evening, by rights belong to you. Many more are waiting for you to bring them through. As you played, I wrote them down, though you played them all by ear, lest the memory of the evening should fade or disappear." And he handed Sean a paper with the notes all jotted down, and a purse of clinking gold coins, sovereigns, not crowns. The folded yellow paper and the purse of coins of gold he placed inside the fiddle case of the fiddler true and bold. Then he said, "It's time to take our leave. Your journey work is done." And he cast a sidelong glance at Sean and smiled at his own pun. So grab your fiddle and your wits, and let's be on our way, and get you home by morning to sleep the day away. Sean began to stammer and blushed a crimson red. "Oh, that's all right," said the Pooka. "I too like my bed." Sean looked all around him. The ballroom was no more. Gone the crystal chandeliers, gone the checkered floor. No chairs, tables, tapestries, no walls. The 7 merry sisters gone, vanished with the hall. Nothing, only grey half-light, and behind him one large door. "Durlock of Farsa McGilligower, at your service, one time more." The journey home was quicker. He placed Sean on his back. Then he pushed the great door open and he leapt into the dark. The darkness and the silence that Sean had known before lasted but a second as they leapt out through that door. The night was full of starlight, and ever in his ears little tunes were playing, but this time sounding clear. There seemed to sail a gentle breeze that lifted them on high. Sean could see the world below as light came to the sky. The stars grew great and twinkling and seemed to fill his mind. Then he closed his eyes and opened them, only to find He was standing by the roadside underneath a tree, the dappled summer sunshine twinkling through the leaves. A lovely summer morning, standing all alone. The Pooka gone, the hours fled, across the road from home. There stood the little cottage, weeds growing from the thatch, garden left to ruin, where the hens would dig and scratch. Then he heard his mother. Calling him by name. Sean Jameson, Donna Caban! And he hung his head in shame. As she came running from the kitchen and hugged him to her breast. Where have you been, Sean Jameson? I've not had any rest. I've been worried almost senseless. You've been gone nearly 2 days. Sean sat down by the roadside. His thoughts were all gone a haze. The Pooka, the sisters, memories were still clear. He opened the fiddle case. The gold was still there. The Pooka's jotted music notes still folded by its side. He took his mother by the hand and said, Let's go inside. When Sean had told his mother the story up and down, he said, The first thing I shall do is take a walk to town and talk with Paddy Gallagher and have him come and fix the thatch. And while he's working at it, I'll have him let me watch, so I can keep it well repaired and fit and in good order. And this afternoon I'll dig those weeds and start the winter garden. Oh, and lest I be forgetting some most important things. If I'm going to practice fiddling, I'm going to need new strings. Then his life began to flourish, beginning on that morn. Neighbors stood in wonder where once they'd scoffed and scorned. And all the things he said he'd do, he did, and did them well. He worked hard at his fiddling, and time began to tell the story of his fiddling skill, the sweetness of his tone, the airs so strange and lovely of the tunes that were his own. And of all the tunes he played, there were 2 or maybe 3 when he'd smile and say, The Pooka gave that one to me. And many years later, he'd meet the Pooka once again. Ah, but that's a different story, and this one's at an end.